if we try to fit in where we don't belong, we're going to end up feeling even more rejection, because
Yeah.
fitting in is about compromising who you really are. This is
Yeah.
what they're like. This is what they accept. This is what they expect from me. So I'm going to be that, but you're not that.
On today's episode of Empowered in Health, I have my friend Shawna here, and I am so excited to just chat about all things related to this feeling of belonging and this feeling of how do we really start to unpack the boundaries that we have or the lack of boundaries that we have, and how all of this affects our inside out wellness. So Shawna, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm delighted to be with you, Erin. It's really an honor.
It's going to be so good. I know, we have a lot we want to chat about. We were just chatting before we hit record today, just about Shawna's passion and the work that she does kind of in the health space, specifically when it comes to spiritual wellness, and how do we really empower all of us as women, as busy people, to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves from the inside out in a very deep rooted way. And so, Shawna, one of the things that I would love to start with is just hearing a little bit more about how you got to where you are right now. I know we talked about it a little bit, but please share with our listeners just what's led you to the work you're doing and how are you actually executing on that these days?
I did deal with rejection, and I honestly to this day cannot figure out where the root of that came from, because I
Yeah.
had such a loving family. My dad was a pastor, my mom was a licensed clinical social worker, and so they knew like healthy everything, and they did a great job. I had a sister, we're Irish twins, so close in age that we actually went all through school together. People thought we were actual twins. And so I'm like, where did this feeling of not fitting in, of not being accepted, where did it come from? And so I really dug into what God says about me as his child, and I found my identity there. So it made all the
Wow.
difference for me, is knowing who I am in his eyes. There's a wonderful story. It's actually a children's story that was written years ago by Max Lucado, and it's about the Wemmicks. And it's called You Are Special, I think. Do you know that story?
I don't know that story.
Oh, it's just so wonderful. And I bought it for my children. And of course, you know how sometimes children's books do that to you. You read them and cry, right?
Yeah.
You read them and get healing or whatever it is. And basically, in the story, there are little characters who live in this land. And if you do something good, people run up to you and stick a star on you. But
Wow.
if you do something bad, they stick a spot on you. And so all over town, everybody can see if you have stars or if you have spots.
Yeah.
And there was this little guy named Punchinello, and all he had was spots. And so sometimes people would see him, and just because he was covered with spots, they'd give him a spot. And he was like, what am I going to do with this? It's just so awful. And then he met this woman who had nothing on her, nothing.
Wow.
And again, this is Max Lucado's story. And so people would sometimes run up to her and stick a star on her because she didn't have any dots,
Yeah.
and it would fall right off. Others would stick a dot because she hadn't earned any stars, and it would fall right off. And so he approached her and he said, what is the secret? What is your, story? And she said, I know, because they were all made of wood. There was a town of little wooden people. And she
Yeah.
said, I know the wood carver. And so that made all the difference for him, was going up the hill and meeting with the wood carver.
Oh my goodness. Wow. What a story. And I
Yeah,
love that you're just speaking about just a lot of different things related to the weight we can carry about things we've maybe done well or things that we haven't done well. And just the idea of potentially being rejected in some way and how that can feel and how we internalize that and inevitably how it affects our identity, what we potentially think about ourselves, our health from the inside out, and so much more. And so, Shawna, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this idea of belonging versus fitting in. I know you've talked a lot about this in the book you've written, which we'll talk about too. But I'd love for you to kind of unpack that a little bit, talk about the differences, and talk about why it matters to really understand the difference between fitting in and belonging.
absolutely. I believe with all my heart that if we try to fit in where we don't belong, we're going to end up feeling even more rejection, because
Yeah.
fitting in is about compromising who you really are. This is
Yeah.
what they're like. This is what they accept. This is what they expect from me. So I'm going to be that, but you're not that. And so ultimately, you feel more rejection.
Yeah.
Belonging is knowing that no matter what you say or what you do, or if you mess up or if you succeed, that you're going to be loved every bit as much. You're going to be accepted. You belong here, not you fit in here.
Yeah.
I remember hearing a story when my daughter was in school, because it was so her. It was Thanksgiving time, and the little children were supposed to act out the whole Mayflower and landing at Plymouth Rock and the whole bit. And they said, so
Yeah.
some of you are going to be pilgrims. You're going to come in off the boat, and they had these little costumes for them, paper costumes. And some of you are going to be the Native Americans who meet them and teach them about living here. And so they all started dividing into these groups. And this one little girl goes up and tugs on the teacher and said, where do the mermaids stand?
It's
It's
so
like,
cute.
some of us are mermaids and we just don't fit in anywhere. And that's
Yeah.
when we start feeling that rejection. And that's why it's so important, as Max Lucado so beautifully put it, is to know your creator, to know the one who formed you, because he made you for a purpose, and
Yeah.
you do belong. You do.
I love that so much. And I love that you just spoke to this idea of like stepping into your uniqueness and owning that. The
Mhm.
mermaid story right there was so good. And, I mean, as a mom of four and a woman who I feel like, I've had my own story of deep insecurity, feeling like I don't belong. Like, I think that there's a lot of narratives that a lot of us go through in some capacity, in some season of our life, where we really feel that in a deep way. And I love how you're calling to attention the importance of just being rooted in who you are and remembering who created you and how you were created on purpose for a purpose, and why that really matters when you're thinking about, being in community or being a part of a group. Like, staying true to who you are is really the key to just continuing on with your authenticity and
Yeah,
continuing
as
on
Aladdin
with.
put it, right? In that wonderful movie, be yourself is what the genie
Yes.
told him. Just
Yes,
be yourself.
100%. And it's so good. Like, and all of these little gentle reminders, humorous or not, like, we have to constantly be reminded of it, because it's so easy to get lost and feel like I just don't know exactly who I am or what I'm doing. And when you're not grounded in that truth, like, it can feel very, very, very jarring and
Mhm.
very unnerving. So, Shawna, I'd love for you to kind of move into talking a little bit more about this topic of rejection. I kind of shared briefly here, but I've definitely gone through seasons in my life where I have felt like I don't belong or I'm rejected in some way. One of my biggest fears as a business owner is rejection. I don't love the idea of people not liking me, people saying no. And I think this is a very common thing, especially for women, because we have these big hearts to serve and we're caring for all the people and we're doing all the things. And sometimes when we get into that vulnerable space of putting ourselves out there, but then we're met with something that feels like rejection, it can feel very hurtful, right? It can really get into our hearts and our souls. So I'd love for you to talk to the person like me or someone else who has maybe felt rejected or unaccepted, something like that. And what do you do with that pain? Like, what do you do when you feel that, and how do you kind of work through it?
One of the things that I always say is learning what I teach in my book is not going to inoculate you from ever being rejected. People are going to reject you. People are going to, haters going to hate, right? It's going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
But you can step back and say, you know what? This is really who I am. I used to teach Bible study at a very large church, and they had so many women coming to class that they were having to turn some away. And so the ministry director came up to me and said, Shawna, would you teach a class that would be very niche? So that obviously everybody didn't sign up for it, but then we didn't have to turn women away. She says, I don't care what you teach on, such an honor and such responsibility, right? That I went to prayer and I said, what should I teach on? And this word just dropped in my heart and mind: rejection. And I was
Yeah.
all, Well, first of all,
Yeah.
Aaron, I was like, no, 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 no. I don't want to teach on rejection because people are going to go, oh, I don't deal with rejection. I don't need to take that class. And then nobody will sign up and I'll be rejected and it'll be
Yeah.
awful. And so I said, I need a little more here, God, as I'm praying and seeking direction. And I just felt that I was led to Psalm 139. In the Old Testament, it's right in the middle of the Bible. It's a wonderful psalm of David, who was a king of Israel. And he writes about what the Lord thinks of him, how
Yeah.
he sees him always, how he knows him before he even says a word. It's just such a beautiful and comforting psalm, most of it. There is a part at the end that gets a little ugly, and isn't life like that? It gets a little ugly sometimes. And so God showed me through this psalm that if his people believed every single word that was in that psalm, they would not suffer from feelings of rejection, even
Yeah.
though it comes. We can't control what people say. I love this story that I have about a woman that went through the class when I taught from the book. And she came very late into the course. It's 10 weeks long. And she came like on week 3 or 4, even. And she was very quiet at first, and then she began to open up more and more. Then, when I taught it again, because I taught it 2 consecutive 10-week sessions, there she was. And so I thought maybe she was just coming for what she had missed the first time around, because she was one of those, super fans, all in, because she had experienced such life transformation. And so
Yeah.
on week 4, week 5, she's still there. I said, Beth, I said, I need to understand what's going on. And she said, I really need this. I need this. She said, just last week, let me back up and say that Psalm 139 has 24 verses in it. So it's a lot to memorize, but they're grouped into themes, Aaron, that are so specific and so easy to remember that I actually wrote just a 7-line, what I call manifesto of acceptance. Words have power. Our
Yeah.
words have power. And so if we're speaking things out loud, even when we don't feel them, that's what helps us come against those feelings of rejection. And I say all that to say that because this woman had been through the class, she had learned the manifesto of acceptance, she knew all 7 lines of it,
Wow.
that week she had gone to the grocery store, and these women who had painfully rejected her, I won't get into the situation, but they came around the aisle in the grocery store and saw her, turned their cart around and went the other way.
Wow.
And she just began right there in the pain of seeing those women that had once been very dear to her, not even wanting to acknowledge that she existed. She
Wow.
just began declaring these truths from Psalm 139. God knows me. He is always with me. I am not invisible. I am wonderfully made. God's countless thoughts are for me. I
Wow.
have enemies, but I can walk in victory.
Yeah.
And as she began to declare that, it just, shifted her whole mindset and feeling.
Wow. That is profound. And I think when you have a tool like that, it just changes everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
know, like, if I even reflect back on seasons or moments in my own life where I felt that sting, I didn't have a place to lean, right? I didn't
Mm-hmm.
have a place to think about shifting my mindset or how to shift that pain or give that pain away in some capacity. So I think, like, really talking through that story and talking about how you can lean into God's truth and things like you said Psalm 139, right?
139. Yeah, I
Psalm
accidentally said Psalm
139.
37. That's one of my favorites. I'm like,
Yeah.
that was a little Freudian there.
Yeah.
But Psalm 139 is where
Yeah.
this manifesto came from. And
Yeah.
it's backed by science, Aaron.
Yeah.
It's absolutely backed by science. There's a psychologist named Dr. Guy Wench, and he actually has a TED Talk that went viral on emotional, I think he calls it emotional or health or intelligence or first aid
Intelligence.
or something like that. But
Yeah.
he said, why is it that when we're wounded by something like those women in the grocery store, for example, that we self-talk ourselves into even more pain?
Yeah.
He said, he gave a story about a woman who had gone through a very painful divorce. and she had done a lot of things to work on herself, and she finally had the nerve, to go onto one of those dating sites and set up a date.
Yeah.
And so she put on her best dress, got her hair done, her nails done, the whole bit, and put herself out there. The man came, sat down, spent about 3 minutes talking to her, and said, "Yeah, this isn't for me." And he
Oh,
left. And
yeah.
so the woman, devastated, she picks up the phone, she calls her best girlfriend, and her best girlfriend says, "Well, what do you expect? I mean, you're at least 15 pounds overweight. You really do need to have your teeth fixed. And you just can't carry a conversation. You never look people in the eye." And he's like, "We would think, oh my gosh, what
Yeah.
kind of friend is that?"
Wow.
And yet she didn't call a friend. She said those things to herself,
Wow.
right? And so
Yeah.
we need to be able to talk to ourselves and say, "I'm not invisible. I am wonderfully made. You know what? This person, they missed out. They
Yeah.
missed out on getting to know a great person."
Yeah.
Or, "Thank you, Jesus, for saving me from such a selfish, narcissistic person," right?
Yeah. And sometimes that's kind of the hard reality, right? Where we grow, we evolve, we change, other people change, and that's just kind of this natural part of life that has
Mhm.
honestly taken me some time to really embrace, because it's hard. Like sometimes it's really hard to see, why have things shifted so much, or why are relationships so different, or I know for me, sometimes I've had these moments where I have internalized, like, well, what did I do? Right? Where am I wrong? What did I create in this situation? And I know, again, I've had this conversation with friends and other women who have internalized and felt the same thing. And so I think you're speaking to a lot of really powerful truths around how we need to be working on our self talk, and how we need to make sure that we're pointing ourselves in the direction of the truth of what really helps us feel good from the inside out. And so much of that comes from the Bible and who God says we are. And I love that you're speaking about this, Shawna, because it's this reminder that we all need. And I know for me, as a busy mom, like I always, or I don't always, but sometimes I forget, like, oh yeah, I need to lean into that, right? Like that is where I need to try to lean first. Because if I'm not leaning there, it's most often not something that's super productive or makes me feel that good. And I know other women do struggle with this too. We don't always remember, like, that's where we should be trying to lean. Because if we don't have that, like, what are we really leaning into? Where is the truth coming from? How are we getting anchored to something outside of ourselves? And so I just love all the stories you're sharing, Shawna. It's just so powerful to hear. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more now about your book. Your book, Longing to Belong, is something that I'm excited to dig into and learn a little bit more. But I'd love to hear a little bit about the start of that book, if you had a specific rejection experience that kind of led you to writing it, and what that process has looked like. We'll get back to our conversation shortly after this message. If you are an overwhelmed and completely confused mom who just wants a simplified, easy to follow, and understandable plan when it comes to their health and wellness journey, then you're in the right place. As a wellness coach, I focus most on empowering women to follow a highly personalized and bio-individual plan that actually gets you results and that feels sustainable for your longevity. I'd love to invite you to set up a free coaching call to talk about your health and wellness journey. Head to erinshreer.com/coaching to set up your call today. Again, that URL is erinshreer.com/coaching to set up your call. And to make it even easier, head to the show notes of this podcast and click free coaching session to set up your call ASAP. Now let's dive back into the conversation.
Actually, that class that I told you about that the woman was in, there are other wonderful stories of just life transformation. And I had written that, by invitation of the women's ministry director at my church, without much thought of it going any further. I had been through the whole "I want to be a published author" thing, where you had to get an agent and you had to get a publisher, and talk about rejection after rejection after rejection. And so when I was encouraged by the women who had been through the class to turn it into a book, I sent a query letter out to the agent of my dreams, and she signed me. And it was just like, it's always timing, right? And I was so over the moon excited. This is so great. Um, But then she like treated me like I wasn't, I mean, honestly, agents make their money when their authors sell their books, and I
Yeah.
was an unknown. She didn't know how well I would perform, and so she
Yeah.
kept putting me off, putting me off. I caught her in a couple of lies that,
Yeah.
most people would have just shrugged off, but I began to feel, this is not a good connection.
Yeah.
And yet, you know who backs away from an agent?
Yeah.
um, but what ended up happening was I was really at this crossroads of not knowing what to do, because my book proposal was basically just sitting there. And so I wasn't trying to sell it. She wasn't trying to sell it. What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And I had gone to the home goods store to buy some bath mats, of all things. And
Yeah.
I was standing at the front of the store. And then all of a sudden, there is my best girlfriend in the world. And she goes, Shawna, does it mean anything to you that I'm here? Well, my first thought was, well, no. What a strange thing to say.
Yeah.
But then the next thing in my spirit, again, I don't hear the audible voice of God, but He speaks definitely with thoughts that pop into your mind that are just out of the blue.
Yeah.
And so, like my own voice talking to myself, this thought popped into my head that said, see what I can do,
Yeah.
see the connections I can make.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, her name's Toby. I said, I don't think she'd mind me saying her name. Toby.
Yeah.
I said, why did you ask me? Does it mean anything to me if you're here? She said, because I was just driving down the street and I was prompted to come in here. And she said, oh my God, is that you? Do I need to go to the home goods store? So it's like, maybe there's something I'm supposed to buy. So she said, I came in, walked all the way to the back. I'm like, and I heard again her little still small voice of God, walk to the front and then you'll know. She said, well, I walked to the front and I saw you, but I still didn't know. And I said, the minute you asked me, I heard the Lord say, see what I can do. And when I voiced that, I heard, I'll be your agent.
Yeah.
I'll get this book sold. And what ended up happening after that, and this is so off topic, but I'm such a storyteller, it's what
Love
I
it.
like to do. I had gone to a writer's conference. It's so important if you want to be a writer to network with other writers. You get to meet agents, you get to meet editors. And it's kind of like a speed dating thing because you make appointments with these agents and editors way in advance. 15 minutes, the bell rings, the next author comes along and does their pitch. And I hadn't done any of that because I thought I had representation when I signed up for the conference. But I kept hearing, you need to meet with Leafwood Publishers. They're looking for authors like you. You need to meet with the executive person was there.
Yeah.
And so, sure enough, there was no availability, none. And the last night, or excuse me, the last morning of the conference, I got a little text, Shawna, can you lead prayer? I need somebody to lead prayer. I was going to do it, but I can't be there. And of course, I'm all nervous. Oh my gosh, getting up on this stage in front of all these people I haven't prepared. And I'm like, prayer. I got this, right? So I go up and I prayed over the events for the day. And then I came down and, of course, went to my morning session. At lunchtime, I'm in the cafeteria, and this man behind me says, thank you for your prayer this morning. That was a beautiful prayer. And I turned around, and Aaron, it was the publisher from this house that everybody kept telling me, you need to meet with this person. And
Wow.
so I said, I keep hearing your name and about your publishing house. I don't suppose you have any available appointments. And he said, no, 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 I don't. He said, in fact, I'm leaving first thing tomorrow. I have a flight out of LAX. I won't even be here. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, well, that's the way it is. So then that night they had a book signing party for all of the authors that had their books there. And I ran into him again. And I said, it's really a shame that I don't have a chance to meet with you. And he said, well, I got some time right now.
Wow.
So much for the 15 minutes and the little bell and all the nerves that come with it.
Yeah.
Over some cookies and coffee, I told him about my book. I shared the manifesto of acceptance with him. And he said, send me your proposal. And then he sent me a contract. So
Wow. I mean, what a story. That is so cool, Shawna. And, it just speaks to how you just never really know how it's going to go,
that's
right?
right.
You don't really have the roadmap that sometimes you dream up in your head. And so often, if not always, things don't go to plan.
No.
Like they aren't according to our plan. And your story about the rejection that you felt and the road you took to actually get to the place of writing your book and having your book published, it's such a good testament to that reminder of how we have to just trust how things are unfolding. And even when it doesn't make sense, and even when we feel rejected, and even when we experience all kinds of different things, because we have so many emotions as humans, like there's a larger story unfolding for a reason. And I think the more you can start to really lean into that concept and have faith around it, there's a lot in our lives that feel less overwhelming or less confusing or less, you know, trying on our day to day. And I know for me, that's something that I've had to work myself into. And the more that I just have faith with how things are going and how things are unfolding, and trusting, like you said, that doors are being opened as they're meant to be opened when I'm ready to be the person that can walk through it, etc. Like that just makes all the difference. And so I can't thank you enough for sharing that.
Yeah, I love the saying. I don't know who came up with it. I'd love to take credit for it. But it's everything will work out all right in the end. If
Yeah.
everything's not all right, it's not the end.
Yeah.
And so when we're in the midst of it, and again, it seems like rejection, it seems like a closed door. I remember there was a friendship that I so desperately wanted because on the outside, it looked like that was the circle to be in. Um,
Yeah.
and then later I found out that she was toxic and she was abusing her friendships.
Yeah.
And I was protected from all of that. And there's things that we just don't know, that we don't see. um, Timing, there's so much, and we
Yeah.
we we tend to just judge by appearances,
Yeah.
and there's so much more going on. I like to say that every rejection is a redirection, and that if it didn't work out here now, maybe it's not meant to be, or maybe it's just not meant to be now.
And that's so true. And something that women, I think, need to hear, right? I know I need to hear that. And still, as a 42-year-old woman, mom of four, like I still have plenty of moments where I feel like that totally insecure 10-year-old, and I feel like my feelings get hurt, and I feel like there's just things I have to work through when I kind of feel that level of pain from potential rejection or not being accepted, et cetera. And I think this is a really deep, real human feeling that so many of us experience. And so when we have tools or we have like mantras and things we can say, it makes all the difference.
It
And so I
does.
can't thank you enough for sharing, rejection is redirection, like all of those kinds of things, like anything that you can lean into to kind of help shift your mindset and speak truth into yourself. Like it's just profound. It's totally profound.
Yes.
Shawna, I'd love to talk. I know we talked a little bit about this in the beginning of our conversation before we hit record today, but one of the things that I want to kind of pivot into a little bit is this idea of boundaries, right? I know
Mhm.
this is another topic that you're passionate about and you teach on. We've talked a lot about this idea of belonging and rejection and how do you manage that pain? What are the truths you can lean into and what that means for your health? The other side of the coin for me that I'd love for you to talk about is this idea of boundaries and healthy boundaries. And,
Mhm.
we've touched on this too, as women, as moms. We're doing a lot, right? We're managing a lot of things. We're taking care of all the people. We're trying to execute on, our passions and how we want to make an impact in the world or whatever the case may be. And so this concept of boundaries can feel really hard. It's hard to say no. It's hard to potentially reject someone else, right? And so
It's
I'd love
so
for you to
true.
talk a little bit about this idea of boundaries, healthy boundaries, and kind of what you speak to women about related to this topic.
Absolutely. I say, and you pegged it, Erin, women like us, I say we have a give and take problem. We really do, because we
Yeah.
give and we give and we give, and then we feel selfish taking. We never want to take. We
Right.
love giving, blessed. It's more blessed to give than to
Yeah.
receive. And so we want to just keep giving. And we end up getting worn out, burnt out, sometimes manipulated and used. And
Yeah.
that's not a good thing. And so
Right.
having healthy boundaries is so important, because then you're like, I'm sure you've heard the story about when they decided, the administrators, the powers that be, that it was so wrong to keep children in these cages on school grounds. Let's pull out the fences so they can be free to
Yeah.
enjoy the yard. Well, what ended up happening was these children, huddled near the building because they were afraid. But once the
Yeah.
fences went back in, they'd run right up to the gate, right up to the fence to get a rolling ball, knowing that they were safe. And boundaries do that for us. They keep us safe. And so if we don't have any, we're going to go too far. Other people are going to go too far. But when we have them, we can say, you know what? This is the line right here and no farther. I always gave people the benefit of the doubt. I was always believing the best in people. And sad to say, some people don't deserve it.
Yeah.
They always say, first time shame on you, second time shame on me.
Yeah.
We have to learn. And I had actually bought this doormat in the midst of that very unhealthy boundary mindset that said, all are welcome here. And I put it at my front door. It seemed just so kind and welcoming at the time
Yeah.
when I saw it in the store. I stuck it at my front door. All are welcome here. And then I realized, no. So
Yeah.
I picked up that mat and I put it at my back door. We're out in the country, and a lot of people don't use our front door. They come through our side gate to our back door. And it
Yeah.
was like, you know what? No, I'm
Yeah.
not putting that doormat there either. It ended up in our garage, where only people that come through that door are me and my husband. And well, most of the time,
Yeah.
most of the time he's welcome here. So it's
Yeah.
safe there. But I realized, you know what? We have absolutely the right to say, um, you're not welcome. You're not
Yeah.
welcome. And
Yeah.
that's not unkind. It's
Yeah.
not unchristian. It's not ungodly. It's healthy.
Yeah, it is healthy and something that I think women need to hear. I
Mm-hmm.
know women are most often wanting to be the people pleasers, wanting to be the caregivers, wanting to be taking care of all the things. But you hit the nail on the head when you said, and I want to recall it, that we burn out, right? We burn
Mm-hmm.
out, we get worn out, and then all of a sudden we're the one that's absorbing all the things. Our health is in shambles. We feel terrible. And it's because we've just been absorbing and consuming and trying to take care of all the things around us versus doing the reverse. And I love that you're talking about this, Shawna, because again, women need these reminders that it's not unkind to have boundaries, right? It's
Absolutely.
not unchristian, right? To actually say, like, these are my needs, these are my boundaries, this is where I can spend my time and energy, this is what matters to me, this is where I know I need to say no or create more white space or whatever it is. And I think it's so important to normalize these conversations, because I know often women think it's bad, right? Or women think that they can't, when in actuality it's an absolute necessity, especially when we're thinking about the health lens and your own personal well-being. This is a huge piece of the puzzle. And I just appreciate you sharing about that, Shawna. So good.
Absolutely. I
So
put
good.
together what I call a path to healthy boundaries, and it has 7 steps. And it forms a circle. The path does, because we're on the inside, and it's kind of like that chain link fence around the schoolyard is that path. And it's important to have each of those 7 pillars in place, because somebody is always going to be trying to come through
Yeah.
in our weak point. And it is hard, especially when we're exhausted. So it's just to focus on one thing at a time, get this one firm and in place, and then I'll work on this next thing. And then, and sometimes it's like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, you move something forward, and then, but it is so worthwhile. And it is definitely, a lot of it, I think, Erin, is relearning some of the cultural norms, some of the religious things we've been taught that
Yeah.
were wrong. I really think that the church has done a disservice to women in its teaching on submission. It gets it lopsided,
Yeah.
and I have so much compassion for women who were like me, that thought,
Yeah.
if I just give some more, if I just love some more, then
Yeah.
it'll be all right.
Yeah.
Um, really, to the cost of their own health.
Yeah.
I
To
ended
the,
up with some autoimmune diseases because of
yeah.
it. It really
Yeah.
affects our health.
And it really does. And this is something that I know we're both passionate about, making sure we're empowering women to understand is you, it sounds so cliche, but it really is the truth. You cannot pour from an empty cup. Like
Mhm.
that is the reality of every facet of our lives. And so when we think about the tangible action of that, like it makes a lot of sense. Like we really can't continue to give and give and give and give without creating boundaries, without really understanding our own needs and getting rooted in that and being okay with voicing what it is that we need and why it matters in our lives and so much more. And so, Shawna, I can't thank you enough for your absolutely incredible story, your knowledge today, everything that you shared around your expertise and the way you're impacting women, especially in the realm of spiritual wellness. And as a health coach, one of the things I talk about with my clients, or really what I teach about, is how wellness is a holistic picture. Like we need
Amen.
to be looking at every single bucket. It is not just how we move our body. It is not just how we nourish ourselves, but it's also like, how are we intentionally filling our spiritual bucket? How are we getting attached to something beyond ourselves? How are we staying grounded in truth that really fills our cup? And so I can't thank you enough for just pointing us in that direction today and sharing everything that you're doing. Before we quickly wrap up, will you talk a little bit about how people can find you, how people can work with you, or if someone wants to connect with you more, how they can do that?
Absolutely. I have a website that is kind of a hub, really, for all things Shawna Marie Ministries. It is what it
Awesome.
used to be called. Now I'm just Shawna Marie Bryant.
Love
Um,
it.
and I do have my book, obviously, and I have courses that I teach live. I love connecting with women, just like I am with you right now, Erin. I'm picturing all of your beautiful listeners on the other side of this screen I'm looking into, and just wishing we could sit down and have a cup of coffee. And so I do teach a 10-week course that teaches those 7 lines of the manifesto. They're going to help you begin to put in your heart and your mind. The Bible says that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So
Yeah.
whatever we're storing up in here, even if it's lies about our worth and what people think of us or how well we perform today, it's going to end up coming out. But if
Yeah.
we have that tool, that declaration that we can declare and say, it'll help drown out. And then we begin to replace all of that. And then I also have a master class on establishing boundaries. And that's where we learn these different pillars, starting with allowing feelings. You know
Yeah.
what? Feelings, you can't pass a moral judgment on a feeling. It's
Right.
not bad to be angry. It's not
Yeah.
bad to be sad. I don't know if you saw that movie. Was it Inside Out? It was a
Yeah.
Pixar
Inside
movie
out.
with joy and
Yep.
sadness. What a wonderful example that was of how
Yeah.
sadness is such an important part of our whole being as a person. We're going to be sad. We shouldn't stuff that. And so
Right.
allowing those feelings, I think, is the number one thing to start on a path to healthy boundaries. Don't stuff, feel.
Yes.
And so I teach you and I walk you through all of that. So if you go to my website at shawnamariebryant.com, there's information about both of those courses. My book is available on Amazon. And so I can send you there, but it's definitely a book that you'll probably want to go through. I mean, it's all about belonging. After all, you don't want to go through it on your own. So buy
Yeah.
it with some friends and go through it together, or find me on my website and see when my next class is going to be, because I would love to walk through it with you.
It's awesome, Shawna. And we will make sure everything is linked in the show notes. So if you're interested in reaching out to Shawna, finding her information, finding more about her master classes, courses, her book, I want to make sure that everything is easy to access. So make sure you go to the show notes. And Shawna, thank you again for your incredible expertise and your time today. I am so grateful for you, and I cannot thank you enough for your time. Thanks so much for
I've
being here.
so enjoyed being here, Erin. Thank you so much for having me. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I know balancing time and energy can be a challenge, and I'm so proud of you for listening in and investing in your wellness journey. I feel incredibly grateful to connect with you and for the opportunity to share more knowledge, stories, and encouragement related to all things wellness. I would love to hear how this podcast has served you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review on either iTunes or Spotify. Your support truly means the world to me and helps me reach more women just like you and me who are looking to transform their health from the inside out. Plus, when you share this episode with a friend, we invite more women in to learn alongside us. What a gift. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better we can do. For ourselves, for our families, and our future. Well done on taking the step towards a healthier, happier you. Until next week, stay empowered and stay well.